Hello and welcome to Hey Ask Me Stuff, the show where you get to ask me stuff. I am Christian apologist Ken Coughlin coming at you from Trinity Lutheran Church and School in Joppa, Maryland. And over there on the other side of the glass, as always, is...
B.A. Thomas. How are you?
Yay, B.A. Thomas. Thank you very much, B.A. and all of you out there in internet lands that are watching us here today. Let me tell you a little bit about the show. This is your first time watching. This is a show that's entirely viewer-driven, where you all come up with questions that you would like me to talk about. I generally do not know what the topic is going to be until a day or two beforehand, when our wonderful production crew picks it out for me from all of the ones that have been submitted. If you have a topic you would like to see on the show, how do you get it submitted? Well, the easiest way to do that is to go to our website, trinityjoppa.org/askmestuff. Go to that website. You will find a form that you can fill out and you can get your questions submitted. Also, if you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel, why don't you go ahead and do that? Like the video, share the video, all that stuff. More about that in the end. But for right now, we're going to dive right into our topic. I do want to mention anybody who's watching this live on Wednesday at 3 o'clock. Normally, we are live streaming, so you can actually interact with us in the live chat on YouTube or Facebook. Today, we're not. This is pre-recorded on Monday because I got summoned to a meeting at 3:15 on Wednesday. So you can interact with us live, but that doesn't mean you can't interact with us. If you have your thoughts on anything I say today, agree with me, disagree with me, and we invite you to please share them in the comments, again, either on the Trinity Joppa YouTube channel or the Trinity Joppa Facebook page, and tell us what you think. We'd love to hear it, all right? And speaking of our topic for today, B.A., what is our topic of the day?
The topic of the day is, what should I reply with if I'm asked, if Jesus or God is real, why can't you see him?
Why can't you see him? You know what I liked about this topic is the way it was phrased, because this is somebody who is obviously thinking about, how to engage in conversations with, people that are questioning their faith. And so they're kind of preparing them, putting on that armor of God, preparing themselves to be able to share the gospel. And this is something that they're wondering about is if, somebody comes to me with this question, maybe it's because it's something they've heard before, how do I respond to that? How do I answer that? And there's a million general principles I could give you. Matter of fact, there's a very good book I'm going to recommend called Tactics, a game plan for discussing your Christian convictions. It's by Greg Koukl, Koukl. That the whole book is just about practical realities about how to engage in conversations. And you'd be surprised how just reading that book helps you navigate some of these conversations without even before you even have to worry about having 1 ounce of content to your knowledge, so to speak, just by kind of asking questions. And, because most of the time when people raise challenges to the Christian faith, to be honest with you, it's just things that they've heard online in sound bites and they've never really thought them through themselves. And so you can make a lot of progress in that regard. But for today's show, I'm not going to explore that tactical approach as much as I'm going to try to give the substantive answer to that, which is, if Jesus or God is real, why can't you see him? So let's say somebody asks you, presents you with that question. Well, for starters, I guess it would depend on whether they ask about Jesus or specifically or just God in general. If the question is just posed about Jesus specifically, if Jesus is real, why can't you see him? That's a bit odd on its face. I mean, imagine if somebody would walk up to you and ask you, if George Washington's real, why can't you see him? Well, because he's not alive here on earth anymore. Jesus, there's plenty of historical evidence. Even atheist or agnostic Bart Ehrman, who is not a believer, has written a whole book on how ridiculous Jesus mythicism is. There's a very small online movement. It's not really within the scholarly community at all. It's just online internet experts, so to speak. I use experts in air quotes, who are trying to claim, well, maybe Jesus didn't really even exist. Even Bart Ehrman has written an entire book about how ridiculous that idea is. Jesus did exist. So 2,000 years ago, there was a human body walking the earth, Jesus of Nazareth, that was in fact real. And so in that regard, asking the question specifically about Jesus, you could just approach it that way. Well, do you believe in George Washington? Well, you can't see him right now, can you? So why would you question whether you should believe in Jesus? But more often, in the way I've heard the question, I know, B.A., you mentioned you've heard this question before. Have you ever usually heard it from people about, from the perspective of, if God is real, why can't I see him?
Yeah, and the usual retort is like, okay, well, the wind is real, but you can't see the wind. Is the wind real? You know?
Well, you don't say it like that.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, you do when you're like 10. You know?
But
that's when I was asked the question.
Actually a relatively profound answer. There's a lot of things you could point out like that. Yeah. See, when someone asks that question of is God real? If God's real, why can't I see him? Number one, they're assuming a naturalistic bias. In other words, naturalism is the viewpoint that only natural things are real, supernatural things are not real. In other words, only time, space, matter, things you can touch, that's all that's real. And the problem is even people who claim to believe in naturalism don't really believe that. Even on a naturalistic worldview, there are plenty of things that we can say are real, that people believe are real, that you can't visibly see. I mean, you give the childhood response of, well, what about the wind? You don't see the wind, but you believe in it, don't you? You don't see radio waves, but you believe, but radio waves are in fact real. So you could kind of ask people in response, well, you say, how do I know Jesus or God is real if I can't see him? Well, you ask, well, can you see the wind? Can you see radio waves? Can you see, do you believe in emotions? Do you believe in logic? These are all things that you believe in, but you can't see. There's plenty of things that are real that we can't visibly see. And there are ways of knowing something is real besides just seeing it visually with our eyes. For example, you can know something is real even if you can't see it based upon the effects that you see. Matter of fact, I got news for you. If you're a scientist, you love quantum physics, no, it's not like Ant-Man and the Wasp and Quantumania that's coming out. That is not what the quantum realm was really like. Neat and nice fantasy, but the nature of quantum mechanics is we can't see it. So how do we know anything about quantum mechanics? Well, by the effects. You look at the effects that these things cause. How do we know quarks are real? By their effects. You can't actually see a quark. And so there's lots of things that you can't see, but black holes. Why do we think black holes are real? By the effects they cause. But even these examples that we gave on a more basic human experience level, how do you know the wind is real? You can't see the wind, but you can see the leaves blowing on the tree. You can feel it against your face. How do you know radio waves are real? Well, because I know that I've got, here in our sanctuary, we got worship services every Sunday. We know radio waves are real. Why? Because we've got, Pastor Ryan or Chris, our worship leader Chris, down there singing into a microphone, and the sound comes out to us up in the tech booth. They sing into a transmitter, and it somehow gets transmitted through the airwaves to the receiver that we have up in the tech booth, right? And then we hear it come through the soundboard out through the speakers. And so we know those, even though we don't see those radio waves, we know they exist because of the effects that we see that come from them. So there's lots of things you can give examples of everyday life of people, the things that they believe in that they can't see, and they know about them by their effects. God can work the same way. We can know God is real. I mean, Romans 1:20 says that, you know that God is real by looking at his creation, by looking at the effects, looking at what he has done. And I want to just point out one or two very quick examples of this, and then I want to look at a couple scriptures as well that explain why God is this way, of effects we can see in the world to know that God is real. And it comes from the design argument. If you are familiar with the design argument, it basically says you can look at certain things and know that to overwhelming probability they weren't the result of random chance, they were the result of design. One example, and I don't remember if this is William Dembski. I might be giving the wrong credit on this. I can't remember who gave this example. Maybe it was Douglas Groothuis. Let's pretend you're walking in a... I'm walking through the mountains on Skyline Drive. I used to love to do that when I was younger. I want to get back there. Hiking up in Skyline Drive. Really and it's beautiful. It's absolutely gorgeous up there. Appalachian Mountains. And I'm walking along, and all of a sudden I see a pile of rocks. And it's just rocks strewn everywhere in every which way. All right. Am I going to look at those rocks that are just strewn every which way with no discernible pattern and say, oh, well, somebody must have walked down this trail before me and placed those rocks exactly where they were? Well, no. But now let's suppose I'm walking down that trail and I see rocks that are laid out, but they're laid out in such a way that they perfectly spell out, welcome to Skyline Drive, Ken Coughlin. All right. Now am I going to think that those rocks just fell that way randomly? No, I can look at the difference between those two things and I can recognize one really gives me no reason to believe that there was an intelligent mind behind them, whereas the other one gives me pretty darn good reason to think there was an intelligent mind behind putting them that way. And William Dembski does explain, he gives three criteria to kind of identify what the difference is and how we do that, what it is about those two examples that allows us to recognize design in one and not in the other. And the three criteria, he says, are contingency, complexity, and specificity. All right. Contingency basically means it didn't have to be that way. Whatever you're witnessing did not have to come about that way through natural processes. I mean, it's kind of like the game Mousetrap. You know, if you ever played that game Mousetrap on the board game, you know, you kick the boot into the stop sign, it starts a chain reaction that eventually leads to the trap falling onto the mouse, right?
Yeah.
Well, if I'm trying to figure out, you know, well, man, why did that trap fall onto that mouse? But it was, and let's say those were all natural laws. Okay, that's a little bit different. I know. Let's say the mousetrap was, every step of that mousetrap was some kind of natural law. Then I would say, well, okay, but it had to be that way because the natural laws made it be that way. It's kind of like if I don't know, it's raining outside. Okay. I don't look at the rain that comes down from the sky, given what we know about meteorology nowadays, and say, well, we need, at least ultimately we're going to get to God on this, obviously, but just say, oh, well, the fact that it's raining today and it wasn't yesterday means some person must have gone up and done something to seed the clouds or something today in order to explain why it's raining today. Well, no, because there are natural processes that lead to rain. And so it was going to rain. The fact that it rained today doesn't mean that I had to have some human agent that made it rain today necessarily. So that's contingency. It didn't have to be that way. There's no necessary natural criteria that made it have to happen that way. The second criteria for recognizing design is complexity, which basically means the more complex something is, the more likely it is to be designed by an intelligent mind. When I was growing up as a kid, my grandparents, my father's parents, had a set of wood blocks at their house, and my parents actually inherited it. They have it at their house now. We used to love to play with them as kids. Now, let's say that I was walking down in my parents' basement, which is where the blocks are now, and I just see one wood block just sitting on top of one other wood block. Would I reasonably look at that and say, oh, my son must have been here and stacked those blocks? Well, no, not necessarily. If all I've got is one block on top of another block, that's not a very complex design, is it? It could have happened just by one accidentally falling on top of the other. Who knows? All right. But now let's say I walk down the stairs and I see like a very, very intricate castle created out of all of these blocks. Now am I going to say, oh, gee, it looks like my son must have been down here playing with the blocks and then tell him to come clean them up? Yes, I am. Okay. Because at that point, the design is much more complex. Therefore, it's much more likely to have been designed by an intelligent mind, not by random chance. And the higher up that complexity scale you get, the more likely it is that it was designed. And then the last criteria is specificity. Specificity means that it's specific. There's something that's pointing to something very specific in this design. It's more than just its random its improbability. Again, apologist Douglas Groothuis gives an example that I think illustrates specificity pretty well, and that's throwing darts at the side of a barn. All right, let's say that you're somebody throwing a dart at the side of the barn. Well, the odds of that dart hitting any one point on the side of that barn are equal. I mean, of any individual point. If you were to compare any individual point with any other individual point, if you just randomly throw a dart at the side of the barn, the odds of it hitting any of those points is equal. All right. However, let's say that we compare the odds of it hitting one particular point on that barn versus all other points combined. Well, now it's not as likely, right, to hit that one particular point versus when weighed against the odds of it hitting any other point that it possibly could hit. But if I just throw a dart at the side of the barn and I say, oh, look, that's exactly where I meant to throw it, but there's nothing on the side of the barn, it's just, are you going to believe me? Probably not, especially if you know I'm a joker, because there's no way to know for sure that I was actually aiming for that specific point as opposed to all others. Now, if I've painted a bullseye on the side of that barn before I throw that dart, then I throw the dart and it hits that bullseye. Now I've specified a target. All right. And so that is what's meant by specificity. All right. if you have something that's specific, that it's designated almost, you have the specific target, so to speak, that it's pointing to, as opposed to just any old random point on the side of that barn. That's specificity. And so these are three criteria we can look at to see whether or not something is designed. The more contingent it is, the more complex it is, the more specified it is, the more likely it is to have been designed. Now, there are things we can look at in this universe that are, I argue, effects. And we can see, based on these criteria, based on these design criteria, they had to be the effects of an intelligent mind. All right? And if they had to reasonably be the effects of an intelligent mind, then these are essentially effects that point to God, just like the leaves blowing on the tree. You conclude the wind exists because you can see the effect it has. We know black holes exist because we see the effects they have, all right? You can know God exists because we see the effects he has. And the effects in this particular instance I'm talking about are these types of things in the universe that had to be the result of an intelligent mind. The universe had to be created by an intelligent mind. Just to give you two very, very quick examples, I know we've talked about in my Christian education class general relativity and the idea that the universe is expanding. All right, it's growing, it's growing, it's growing. And in moments after the Big Bang, it actually underwent a point of rapid inflation, and then the expansion kind of steadied off. Well, did you know that within that 1 second, about 1 second or so after the Big Bang, after the universe was created, the rate of the expansion, in other words, how rapidly the universe was expanding, was so precise, so incredibly precise. As a matter of fact, even Stephen Hawking, the late Stephen Hawking, conceded that if it was smaller, so slower, expanding more slowly, by 1 part in 100,000 million, minuscule, okay, then it was the entire universe at that point would have collapsed in on itself. In other words, it wouldn't have been expanding rapidly enough to overcome the forces of gravity of everything in the universe that would have just pulled it all back together. All right. Flip it the other way. All right. If it was off the other direction by the same amount, so it was growing more rapidly by that same minuscule, inconceivably minuscule amount. All right. Then the universe would be essentially empty today, because everything would have been expanding so rapidly, you wouldn't have been able to have matter come together to form stars and planets and everything like that. All right. So in order for life to exist in our universe, the dial, if you want to think of it that way, as far as setting a dial on how rapidly our universe was expanding, is unimaginably precise. All right. And when you see something that's set to that level of precision, generally speaking, in any other context, you're saying somebody must have set it that way. The odds of it being set that way by chance are just too inconceivable. But it's not just that. I mean, and there's tons of laws and constants of the universe like this. I'll just give you one more example, and that's the law of gravity. All right. Imagine for me, if you will, a ruler that runs the entire length of the universe, essentially. All right. And that ruler represents the range of known forces. All right. From, gravity being a force that can pull things together, the weak nuclear force, the strong nuclear force, things like that. If we were to have that ruler represent all the strengths of all known forces in the universe, if we were to take the force of gravity and just move it by 1 inch for the entire length of the universe, all right, life wouldn't exist. Why do I say that? Because if you made it 1 inch stronger, then the force of gravity would be too strong and planets would be so small, because matter would be getting crunched together so much that they wouldn't be able to support life. All right. If you were to move it the other direction by 1 inch, make it 1 inch weaker, then just like we talked about with the expansion of the universe, gravity would be too weak to actually pull matter together to form planets. And so you don't have life either way. So those are some examples of things that if you think of the universe as being a combination of dials, or the laws and constants of the universe being a combination of dials that are set so incredibly precisely that in any other context, we're going to say somebody must have done that on purpose. All right. Well, if I'm right about that, if that's true, that these indicate that the laws and constants of the universe must have been set by someone, all right, must have been set by an intelligent mind. Well, who's that intelligent mind? Well, that's God. That points to a creator of the universe. So just like in those other examples, even though we can't visibly see God, we can know he's real by what he has done. All right. And of course, there's a million other examples I can give that I won't. A lot of people will talk about their personal testimony, obviously, about their experience with God. That's obviously more a personal one. I can't make you feel my testimony, but millions and millions of people will talk about their personal testimony of their experience of God as well and how real that is. So that's the apologetic answer to if God isn't real, or if God is real, why can't I see him? Well, it's kind of a double standard that's being set up. There's plenty of things we do believe in that we can't see, and if we apply that same basic reasoning to why we believe those things even though we can't see them, that same reasoning applies to God, and we can know that God exists even though we can't see him. But I do want to just take a few minutes here to look at a couple of scriptures to explain kind of why this is. Why is it the case that we don't see God? Well, the first thing is because God is spirit. All right, John chapter 4, verse 24 says, God is spirit, and his worshipers must worship in spirit and in truth. What does spirit mean? It means he's not material. And we've talked about this, I think, on shows before. You know, this desk is made up of matter. This microphone is made up of matter. God is not. All right, he's immaterial. All right. And the reason we can see this microphone is because it's made up of matter, right? It's composed of matter and it's sitting there. If God is not composed of matter, he's a life form that is immaterial, then we wouldn't expect to be able to see him, all right? So that's the first answer. The reason you can't see God is because God is spirit. Now, there have been some instances in the Bible where some people have talked about seeing God, but then when you dive deeper into them, you realize that they didn't really see God entirely. God did something to represent himself that they were capable of seeing. So why did God do that? Why did God create a cloud or a robe or something? There's a robe in Isaiah, a cloud in Exodus, I believe, that would represent his power and his glory rather than just showing himself to people and letting them see him. Well, aside from the fact we already talked about, he's spirit, all right, he is also holy, all right? He is perfect. He's overwhelmingly holy. We are not, all right? And because he's holy, because he's perfect, and we are so far from that, we cannot enter his presence as we currently are. Nothing impure can exist in the presence of God. It would kill us, essentially. And we do see that in several Bible verses. Leviticus 19:1 through 2 has God talking to Moses, and he tells Moses, speak to the entire assembly of Israel and say to them, be holy because I, the Lord your God, am holy. Well, why does God have to tell people to be holy? Because we're not, right? That's the whole point. We're not holy. He is holy. And then if you look at Leviticus chapter 10, verses 1 through 3, you see the example, the story of Nadab and Abihu, and there's plenty of examples of this, who tried to enter what was seen as the presence of the Lord, which is, the Ark of the Covenant at that point in time, the presence of the Lord, and they offered some kind of offering they weren't supposed to. They were basically making light of being in the presence of God, and they died. They died. And God responded to their death by saying, among those who approach me, I will be proved holy. In the sight of all the people, I will be honored. And that's the idea, is that we are so unworthy compared to God that for us to be exposed to truly the full glory that is him, we would die instantly, all right, because we are so unworthy and don't deserve to be in that presence. We are a filth, a stain compared to him, all right? Now, so God is spirit, God is holy, and we are not. That's why we don't see God. That being said, God also loves us, and he knows that we are weak, and for human beings, lots of times, seeing is believing, right? He gets it, right? And so I gave the example in class, in a couple classes I've taught. We talked about baptism, and that God, according to our Lutheran tradition, God actually bestows grace. He gives grace upon the recipient in a baptism. But what's the number one ingredient in baptism? What do you always think of when you think of baptism? Come on, BA, this is one you can participate in. What do you think of when you think of baptism?
Water!
Water! There you go. Does God need water in order to bestow grace upon someone?
Well, no, but he uses it.
Yeah, no, he doesn't need to, but he does.
Yeah.
And we talk about in my Christian Ed class and some other class teacher, well, why does he do that? If he doesn't need water, why does he use water? Because if we just look at people and say, oh, don't worry, trust me, God just bestowed grace right there. You didn't see it, but he did it. What are our weak minds going to do?
No, he didn't.
We're not going to believe. We're going to doubt, all right?
Yeah.
Because we need to see. And so the whole point of water is not because water is necessary. It's because God knows we're weak-minded fools, essentially. And so he uses water so that we have some kind of visual representation of what he is doing invisibly. All right. And he did the same thing 2,000 years ago, knowing that we weak-minded fools have a hard time believing what we can't see, but we're not able to see God because he's spirit, because he's holy. So what's he do? He did come to earth. God the Son, Jesus Christ, took on flesh, became a man, and walked among us so people could see him. All right? And by seeing him and getting to know him, they would get to know God. All right? And this is not just me making it up. This is flat out right out of Scripture. John chapter 1, verse 18. No one has ever seen God. That's what we just talked about before, right? But the one and only Son, who is himself God and is in closest relationship with the Father, has made him known. That's the point. The Son, Jesus Christ, came to earth in flesh. Jesus is God. And by knowing Jesus, we know God. By seeing Jesus, we see God. And so the question, well, if God is real, why can't I see him? The answer also could be phrased as a lot of people did. I mean, your assumption is incorrect. God did find a way so that people could visibly see him. And you have plenty of historical evidence and historical testimony from the people who actually did see him, enough to warrant your faith and to warrant belief that it is in fact true. All right, so why can't I see, if somebody asks you, if Jesus or God, if God is real, why can't you see him? First you point out, well, there's plenty of things you do believe in that you can't see, and we just apply the same standard there. We can't, just like we come to believe those things through other means other than visibly see them, we can come to believe in God by other means other than seeing him. And oh, by the way, actually, people did see God because Jesus is God, which, by the way, you'd be surprised how many people in our culture today don't realize that. You'd be surprised how many people in our churches today don't realize that Jesus is God. I often tell the story of a class I taught on Hebrews, not the current one I just finished, but this was 15 years ago or more, where I had a gentleman probably in his 70s who was in the class, and that was the first time in that class he was telling me that somebody told him that Jesus is God. And this guy had been going to church, as far as I know, all his life. And so it was kind of shocking. And so I've always kind of made it my mission. It's like, no, if I'm teaching, you're going to know Jesus is God. And so God, it did make himself visible. People did see him. And yes, Jesus isn't continuing to walk around the earth today. He's going to return. We're going to see him again. But we have plenty of evidence out there from the eyewitnesses who did see him to kind of back up the truth that this, in fact, did happen. So, any questions on that, B.A.?
No.
Your enthusiasm for water was admirable, I have to say.
Thank you. Oh, add a thing.
Yeah.
Water's the most visible thing that we can touch. Thought I'd throw that out there.
Did you just come up with that? Or?
Yeah.
I like it. And I have water. We will test this theory. Can I touch the water? No, I'm not going to touch mine. I'm going to stick my finger in my water. So, all right. Well, again, next week we hope to be back live. I apologize for not being able to be live this week, but please still share your thoughts with us. Go ahead and comment in the comments section. Like this video, share this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. We got some more fun things coming up, including new episodes of the 513 show is dropping very, very soon, and a new wait for it. I'm going to come up with it. Give me a second.
We're not doing the wait. That's a different one.
No, not it's I call it the Peely Offy thing, and I got it right last week. It's Google Autocomplete.
Hey, good job.
There you go. We have a neat, funny video from Google Autocomplete coming out before the end of the month as well, and more episodes of the Hebrews Bible Study. So subscribe to the YouTube channel so you don't miss any of the wonderful content that we have here. All right. Thank you, B.A.
Hey, no problem.
And for being adaptable and filming this on a Monday morning. Thank you all for watching, and we hope you can join us again next week live at 3 o'clock on Wednesday. God bless.